Folks, we've made it to the final episode of Magnus Madness. If you are completely lost and have no idea what that means, I've been releasing videos that recap different seasons of the Magnus archives. In these videos, I rate how scary I found each episode, with 1 meaning not scary to the point of being laughable, and 5 being this is terrifying, I want my mommy. You can find a playlist containing all these videos down in the description, along with a list of episode-by-episode content warnings. Last season, the gang went running around trying to foil all the different entities' rituals so they wouldn't be able to cross into our world. In the finale, however, John was tricked into performing one of these rituals, letting all 14 entities, or more like 14.5 entities, seeing as a new one called the Extinction has started to form, into our world. Now that we're on the same page, we are ready to tackle Season 5. 161. Dwelling. John and Martin are hiding out in the cabin they'd been renting, but Jonah knows exactly where they are. He taunts them by sending them recordings of the original team's happy memories. Martin tries to convince John they need to leave the cabin and stop this, but John doesn't want to provoke the entities, which so far have left them alone. When the boys notice a tape recorder that wasn't there before listening in on them, they interpret it as a sign that the entities won't be leaving them alone for much longer. 3 stars. 162. A cozy cabin. One of the tapes Jonah sent captures a conversation between Tim and Sasha, where it's revealed they had a secret relationship. Listening to this overwhelms John with the need to avenge his friends, so he agrees to join Martin in hunting down Jonah. 3 stars. 163. In the trenches. The outside world has become utterly warped by the entities, who have divided it between their avatars into domains. The first John and Martin pass through is tied to the slaughter, and John is compelled to narrate the fear of those trapped within it. The domain takes the form of an active battle zone, where people are blasted by rockets, run over by tanks, and suffocated by tear gas. As John and Martin exit this domain, Martin notices a ringing payphone, but decides not to answer it. 4 stars. 164. The Sick Village. John and Martin pass through a village that is infected with a disease. Villagers swaddle themselves in protective gear, ostensibly to keep from being infected, but secretly, each has already caught the disease and is trying to cover up the symptoms. The villagers blame the disease on outsiders, and whenever someone enters their domain from another, if they aren't tortured to death, the villagers will intentionally infect them with the disease. They seem to know better than to try this on Martin and John, the latter of whom uses his powers to confirm which of their friends still live. Simply thinking of Helen is enough to summon her, and she tries to convince the pair to adapt to this new world instead of trying to change it. Martin asks if she can give them a shortcut to Jonah through the distortion, but John's grown too powerful to fit within it anymore, so they have to part ways, but she promises to check in on them throughout their journey. 5 stars. 165. Revolutions. There is a giant, mile-wide merry-go-round that is overflowing with people who have all lost their memories. Only those sitting on a mount can recall who they were before the apocalypse. Said mounts go high up into the air, giving their rider a few seconds of remembrance, but as soon as they come back down, the rider will be torn off, replaced with another, and forget who they were again. As John and Martin walk around the merry-go-round's edge, the Not Them appears and threatens to attack them. Considering they were able to travel through the past 2 dimensions unscathed, John doesn't believe it can attack them. It appears the entities have labeled him, and Martin by extension, off-limits, since he brought about their apocalypse. But that doesn't mean he can't affect their avatars. He declares,
"Ceaseless Watcher, turn your gaze upon this wretched thing,"
and obliterates the Not Them. Even some people outside the fandom are familiar with this phrase, as it has become a beloved meme. 4 stars. 166. The Worms. Helen visits Martin and John again as they pass over one of the Buried's domains. Within this domain, people are trapped underground, trying to claw their way to the surface, But whenever it rains, the dirt turns to mud, they slide back down, and their tunnels close, forcing them to start all over. Whenever their way gets blocked by another digging person, they have to dismember the person in front of them in order to pass. John admits he feels ashamed of his new power to obliterate people, as it's only now possible because he brought about the apocalypse. Martin and Helen try to convince him to let go of the guilt and go on a vengeful murder spree. As they walk, Martin hears the ringing of a phone coming from underground and accepts the call. It's from Annabelle Kane, who offers Martin help, but he hangs up on her. 4 stars. 167. Curiosity. John uses his powers to ask the Eye about Gertrude Robinson. It reveals her closest confidant had been her assistant, Emma Harvey. While Gertrude was distracted with trying to prevent the rituals, Harvey would experiment upon her co-workers, intentionally sending them into dangerous situations to see how different entities react. When Gertrude learned of this, she realized that Emma was an avatar of the web, killed her, and resolved to never let herself get attached to another of her employees ever again. 2 stars. 168. Roots. John and Martin enter the domain of Oliver Banks, who shares a theory with them that since new humans aren't being born, those that die aren't being replaced. This means the entities will eventually run out of prey, and upon doing so, will fade from existence. 2 stars. 169. Fire escape. The boys come across Jude Perry's domain, which takes the form of a burning building. John finds her within it and is about to smite her as he did with the Not Them, but she gets in one last word and accuses him of secretly enjoying the very fear he condemns her and the other avatars for spreading. 1 star. 170. Recollection. While traveling through a domain of the lonely, Martin and John become separated. As Martin wanders around, he starts losing his memory, and regresses all the way back to thinking he's a new hire at the Institute. Remembering John provides him some clarity, and by holding on to that memory, John is able to find him again. John worries that Martin might want to stay in this place, since here he can drown the apocalypse out and forget all the awful things that have happened. But upon regaining his memories, Martin is determined to stay by John's side and promises to always do so. 3 stars. 171. The Gardener. John and Martin enter Jared Hopworth's domain, where he's twisted people's bodies into sculptures based on the victims' distorted views of themselves. John smites Jared, but the sculptures remain unchanged. 2 stars. 172. Strung Out. In a domain of the web, a person is puppeted across a stage, forced to reenact the worst moments from their life, and unable to change their choices. 3 stars. 173. Night. The boys come across a domain where children are chased by and hide from monsters that lurk in the dark. At first, Martin wants John to smite whoever's been torturing these kids, but changes his mind upon realizing that this domain's avatar, Callum Brody, is a child himself. 2 stars. 174. The Great Beast. John and Martin travel through a domain of the vast, where people try to avoid getting squashed by a giant creature, but no matter how far they run, they can never find the end of its shadow. There are even more people trapped atop the giant creature, clinging to its back and trying not to be dislodged. Simon Fairchild drops by, and I do mean that literally, he swoops down from the sky at them, but escapes before John can smite him. John admits that smiting every avatar he sees is taking a toll on him, and he's not sure if he can keep it up. 3 stars. 175. Epoch. John and Martin encounter their first extinction domain, one where trash has overtaken the world and mutated what few creatures remain. Martin asks if the extinction having a domain means that it's now a fully fledged entity, but John says it doesn't really matter anymore. His eye powers warn him that Daisy and Basira are up ahead, and he tells Martin to prepare himself, as Daisy has reverted back to her old ways. 2 stars. 176. Blood Ties. In the next domain, a group of hunt avatars pursue a single target, but whenever they kill said target, they cast out one of their own to be the next prey. Daisy has given back in to her patron and become one of the hunters, killing Julia Montague when she was the prey. The current target is Trevor Herbert, who attacks Martin, but Basira appears and kills Trevor to save her coworker. 1 star. 177. Wonderland. Daisy flees into a domain of the Spiral that takes the form of a mental health facility. The doctors there gaslight their patients, accusing them of making up symptoms for attention and being a drain on others' resources. As a disabled person, this episode hurt me, and I have to give it 5 stars. 178. The Processing Line. The trio track Daisy into a domain of the flesh that takes the form of a factory. Within it, people are being harvested for their body parts, only to be told after being dismembered that all of their parts are useless. Upon finding the remains of one of Daisy's victims, Basira realizes that everyone Daisy has killed so far has been someone she suspected was a criminal. Basira struggles to accept the pain Daisy is capable of causing, but John forces her to confront that Daisy was a monster long before she gave in to the hunt, and her attempts to improve herself could not undo the police brutality she'd committed. 4 stars. 179. Accomplice. Daisy murders a man who is being forced to destroy items that remind him of people he loves. The trio confront her, and Daisy tries to convince Basira to join the hunt with her, but Basira refuses and goes through with killing her. While John and Martin need to continue on their journey, Basira chooses to remain behind and grieve. 3 stars. 180. Moving on. John and Martin pass through a cemetery where people are expected to mourn and praise their dead abusers. The episode ends with Martin and John being invited inside a house by Annabelle Kane and Mikhail Salesa. Upon entering, they fall asleep for the first time since the apocalypse began. 3 stars. 181. Ignorance. When the boys awaken, John finds himself unable to use his powers. Salesa reveals that the broken camera he acquired back in Season 4 creates a bubble that hides everything around it from the entities, hence why John is cut off from the eye. Salesa tells them he always tried to remain neutral in the entities' wars against one another, but could tell they were all getting stronger, so he prepped this space for the inevitable apocalypse. He invites them to stay, but John has become too reliant upon his link to the eye, and without it is becoming sick. So, he and Martin head back out. 1 star. 182. Wellbeing. John and Martin arrive at a hospital run by avatars of the Stranger, who keep performing surgeries upon their victims that replace their body parts with plastic. They encounter Breakin working there, but he's lost the will to live without hope, so John smites him out of mercy. 3 stars. 183. Monument. Martin and John encounter a domain that exists to mock those who tried to categorize the fears. Those within it are subjected to an assortment of tortures, and waste their time trying to find a pattern in which torture is linked to which entity. 1 star, 'cause I was kinda laughing with the entities at them. 184. Like ants. John and Martin travel through a tunnel filled with ants. The people within have to keep moving to keep the ants off of them, but whenever they step on one, this enrages the hive. Martin recognizes one of the ants' victims and asks John to save him, but the only way John can do so is by turning him into an avatar. When John tells the man what his new role will be, the man says he would have preferred to remain the tortured than to stoop so low as to become the torturer. 2 stars. 185. Locked in. This domain takes the form of a prison, where the people trapped within have no idea why they've been arrested. Everyone they interact with, from the guards to the people outside their barred windows, is abusive towards them, saying that as criminals they deserve no less, even though none of these people can recall their crimes. This episode is pretty controversial, as while it was written before Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, it was released amid a wave of Black Lives Matter protests, and some listeners felt it was exploitative, while others found it strengthening. In terms of fear, I have to give it 5 stars. 186. Quiet. The boys come across Martin's domain, a twisted maze of reflective ice. Martin asks John to give him a moment alone in it. Upon entering, Martin is confronted with a sentient reflection of himself. The two of them discuss their relationship with John, fear of losing him on their quest to save the world, and their complicated feelings surrounding their mother. The reflection tells Martin that the people within their domain were all shut out by their families and struggled to connect with others. The coldness they felt is now externalized in the ice, and they are tortured by the constant sight of their reflections. 3 stars. 187. Checking out. While Martin explores his domain, John takes a peek at Helen's, where she has trapped a woman who is looking for her son in the distortion's endless hallways. Disgusted with how Helen is toying with this woman, John has to face that the Helen he knew and related to is gone. The distortion that remains must be destroyed. He smites her, and Martin returns from his domain. While he mourns this loss, he understands John's decision. 2 stars. 188. Center of attention. John and Martin travel through a suburb whose inhabitants are constantly monitored by cameras. Everyone knows everything about their neighbors, and have no discretion when it comes to expressing judgment upon one another. 3 stars. 189. Peers. And 190. Scavengers. Martin and John discover Georgie and Melanie among a group of survivors living in the tunnels beneath the Institute, which Robert Smirk had designed to be cut off from all the entities, and is thus invisible to them. Georgie's fearlessness and Melanie's self-inflicted blindness have made them invisible to the entities as well. So, they've been breaking into domains to rescue people and bring them back to the tunnels. The survivors have formed a cult surrounding the two of them, much to their embarrassment. Being cut off from the eye is having a negative effect on John, but he tries to stick it out. 1 star. 191. What we lose. John and Martin get into an argument with a cultist who is convinced that their presence will bring nothing but trouble, and Melanie admits she agrees. The gang begin to formulate a plan, but John reveals to Martin that even if they can banish the entities, doing so will likely kill him as well, as his life has become too deeply linked to the eye. 1 star. 192. An appointment. John and Martin encounter one of their old co-workers, Rosie, who, while she appeared in previous episodes, really didn't warrant mentioning until now, as she was never close to the main characters, and tended to hang out more with Elias. She is aware that the world has changed, but insists on acting as if it hasn't, as that's always been how she's coped with the strangeness of the Institute. 1 star. 193. A stern look. We're given a flashback to how the original Elias Bouchard, the one whose body Jonah Magnus is currently possessing, started working at the Magnus Institute. He'd received a letter inviting him for an interview, despite having never applied for a position there. He was interviewed by Jonah Magnus's previous toast, and answered every question with a prepared statement, But he was unable to shake this feeling that the interviewer knew what his real answer would be and was judging him based on those. Back in the present, John reveals to Martin that if John's the one to kill Jonah, he'll become the next pupil, much like how Helen became the distortion. What's suspicious, though, is that the Eye seems to want this to occur. 3 stars. 194. Parting. John and Martin argue over whether John should become the pupil, with John thinking he might be able to use the pupil's powers to correct things, and Martin believing becoming the pupil would corrupt him. John walks away and tries to cool down by reciting a statement in which a person's judgmental relative passes away. At first, the person is relieved, but then that relative's eyes, arms, and mouth begin to sprout from their body, continuing to cast judgment upon the way they live their life. John goes to apologize to Martin, but Melanie tells him that Annabelle Kane came by and took Martin with her to Hilltop Road. 4 stars. 195. Adrift. Annabelle has taken Mikhail's camera and is using it to keep John from seeing what she and Martin are up to. While trying to track them down, John reunites with Basira, who decides to join him. They have to row a boat across a body of water where those that fall in can never re-emerge. Most people sink endlessly through the depths, unable to drown, but the few who actually make it to the surface lose hope when they can't find land, and then join the sinking others. I hate deep water, I hate deep water, I hate deep water. 5 stars, I just hate deep water. 196. This Old House. And 197. Connected. Martin and Annabelle arrive at Hilltop Road and wait for the others upon a web suspending over its interdimensional tear. Martin realizes that the webs they're suspended on aren't made of string, but tape from the recorders. Annabelle reveals that all this time, the gang had simply assumed the recorders were linked to the Eye, when really, they'd been sent by her to spy on them. As soon as Basira and John arrive, Annabelle reveals that much like Oliver Banks theorized, the web has always known that a successful ritual would result in the end of all life, and, by extension, the entities. Hence, it never attempted a ritual of its own, and constantly pitted the entities against one another so that theirs would be foiled. Now that one has succeeded, the web wants to return the world to the way it was, and plans to do so by dragging the entities with it through the Terran reality that the gang currently stand atop of. However, the other entities are currently too strong. In order to weaken them, the archives and all the statements it contains must be destroyed. So, all the way back in Season 1, she sent John a lighter with a web pattern. One that's been sitting in his pocket since then, one that would allow her to track him even when he was in areas that were cut off from the entities, one for him to someday use to burn down the archives. She points to this as proof that she really had been planning this all along, but her manipulation of John's life goes back even further, as she reveals it was her that gave John his first Lightner book. 2 stars, I love you, evil spider lady. 198. Precipice. Basira, John, and Martin travel back to the Institute, but along the way, they must ascend a cliff by climbing down a rickety ladder. Eventually, the ladder comes to an end, and John tells them they have to jump the rest of the way. 4 stars. 199. Seeing it through. Our trio reunites with Melanie and Georgie, and argue over whether to go through with Annabelle's plan. Everyone but John endorses it, but he doesn't think it's fair to condemn another reality just to save their own. He suggests becoming the pupil and then using his powers to kill everyone, but the others are understandably less enthusiastic about his plan. He goes out for a smoke and Georgie joins him, borrowing the web lighter. The gang eventually agrees on a plan where the girls will blow up a gas main to set the archives on fire, while the boys will avenge their fallen friends by killing Jonah. Martin insists on being the one to deliver the killing blow so that John won't be able to take Jonah's place as the pupil, and John agrees. 1 star. Last but not least, the final episode. 200. Last words. Once the plan is put into action, John immediately goes back on his promise, running ahead of Martin to confront Jonah alone. Jonah, after centuries of hopping from body to body, finally faces death. John dedicates the murder to Sasha, Tim, Gertrude, Jerry, and every other life the entities and Institute snuffed out. Martin catches up to John, and while he's devastated, he reveals the team knew all along that John would never give up on his plan, so they'd made another behind his back. Instead of waiting for the boys to kill Jonah, the girls had gone to the archives early, intending to destroy it before John could ever get the chance to seize Jonah's powers. And by now, it's too late to call them off. As the archives begin to burn, so does John, and he begs Martin to put him out of his misery. Martin tearfully does so, but not before reminding John of their promise to never leave the other behind, and then presumably takes his own life as well. With the disruption caused by the Institute's destruction, the web is able to drag the other entities with it through the rift in reality, and the world returns to normal. The girls go looking for John and Martin, but the only trace that remains of either of them is a still-running tape recorder. Basira says to it that if John, Annabelle, or anyone else out there is still listening to them, that she wishes them luck. And with that, the series ends, along with this one. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I hope I was able to detangle some of this series' many threads for you. Fortunately, the Magnus Archive story is still expanding in a spin-off series called the Magnus Protocol. Since that podcast is still ongoing, I won't be able to make any videos like these for it until it's finished, as I don't yet know what will and won't be important in the long run. I certainly never would have guessed that that lighter from episode 35 would still be relevant seasons later. I hope you all had as much fun with these videos as I did, and continue to stick around to see what else I'm gonna make. To end this series, much like Basira ended the Magnus Archives, if anyone's listening, goodbye, I'm sorry, and good luck.